Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we're discussing 3 more cold cases recently solved with new evidence. But first, I want to let you know this video is sponsored by PDS Dead. More on that in a minute, but with that being said, let's get into it. Number 1. John Stagner. It was around 5 a.m. on August 10, 1992, when Donna Stagner went to wake up her 53-year-old husband, John Stagner. The Stagner family lived in Orange County, Florida. John was a maintenance worker for the county, and the family lived in a home on the Orange County maintenance property and served as live-in caretakers for the equipment that was housed there. John had been called out the previous evening to repair a power line that had come down in a storm. When Donna had gone to bed, John had only just come home, and he was watching TV in the living room. The couple slept in separate bedrooms in the summer because Donna preferred to sleep with the air conditioning on and John didn't. She entered the bedroom John slept in and tried to wake him the following morning. She hadn't turned on the lights yet and touched his arm, only to notice he was cold to the touch. She turned on the lights and made the horrific discovery that her husband had been violently attacked. He'd been severely beaten to death. Donna called 911 and law enforcement came out to the property. Detectives secured the scene. DNA evidence while in its infancy in 1992, care was taken to find as much evidence as possible that may be useful, and it was preserved well. The murder weapon, a wood cane or walking stick, was found at the scene, and it was determined that someone had come into the home while the family slept and attacked John while he slept. There was no evidence in the home to suggest there had been any struggles or break-ins. That night, John had been sleeping with his bedroom window open. It was a single-story house, and law enforcement believed the attacker entered the home that way. The crime was unusual. The home hadn't been burglarized, it didn't appear that anything was missing, and John had been the sole victim. John was a hard-working man. He had worked for Orange County for many years and was well respected in his community. He was also very generous and treated those around him with kindness. His murder had not only been shocking, but senseless. Officers started canvassing everyone in John's life, friends, family, and co-workers, trying to find someone who may have harbored a grudge towards John. One name came up: Ronald or Ronnie Cates. Cates was in his 30s, and his family was close to the Stagner family. The Stagners had really helped out Cates and his family, who at one point had been homeless, and John provided them with housing, money, and meals. Some even said that John had been a father figure to Cates. Needless to say, the Stagner family had always been kind and generous to the family. Detectives learned from Donna that John and Ronnie had a little bit of a falling out. John had lent Ronnie a bunch of tools and asked for them to be returned, and John was having a hard time getting them back from Ronnie, which had him frustrated. Law enforcement went to Cates' house to interview him, and when they got there, his young daughter answered the door and seemed visibly shaken. She said that he wasn't home. They stayed near the home for a bit and noticed later a truck peel out of the driveway. They went back to the home, and his daughter admitted that her father had been home and she had been instructed to lie to them. They wrote down a detailed account of the interaction, which had been helpful in the present-day investigation. They did eventually catch up with Cates and brought him in for questioning, and he gave several variations of his whereabouts the night that John had been murdered. Along with him evading police and other accounts from those who interacted closely with Cates, they were immediately suspicious that he may have been involved in John's murder. The best tools law enforcement had for prosecution in '92 were blood evidence and fingerprints, but because Cates had been a frequent guest, the prosecution didn't think it would be enough to prove that Cates had been in the home that night. Eventually, no additional information was found that could be used as evidence against him, and the case went cold. Then, in 1995, Ronald Cates was committed during a mental health crisis. While in a hospital, Cates confessed to killing a man in '92, but also had confessed to killing several historical figures, and although it was noted, there wasn't much that could be done with that confession because he hadn't been in a mental state that could hold him accountable. Then, in 2020, Cates found himself in other criminal troubles and was put in jail, Once he was in jail, Kate's wife came forward with information that she had been too scared to come forward with before. She explained that Kate's was a violent man and he had abused substances for much of their marriage. Now that she felt it was safe to do so, she wanted to get justice for the Stagner family. She said that in '92 she had been the sole breadwinner for the family. She said that at the time her husband hadn't been able to keep a job because he'd been addicted to drugs. She also confirmed that Kate's had sold several of John Stagner's tools that had been lent to him in order to purchase drugs. She believed that Kate's had murdered John after he had confronted him about bringing the tools back. The murder weapon had never been released to the media, but had been some sort of homemade walking stick. She confirmed that Kate's used to always walk around with one. She also revealed that he hadn't been home that night, but returned in the early morning hours on the night John was murdered, with his clothing covered in blood. When they interviewed Kate's children, one of them had a vivid memory of her father asking her to hide a bunch of clothing underneath the house. Then, 2 days later, she was asked to grab the clothing again, and she watched him burn the clothing. In August 2022, Ronald Kates was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He's being held in North Carolina jail while he awaits extradition back to Florida. Kates has been open and forthcoming with law enforcement. While he didn't explain the motive behind killing John, he did reveal how John was murdered and several details that only someone who had been there would have known.
On August 10th in 1992, our deputies responded to North Forsyth Road, where they found 53-year-old John Stagner deceased. He had head and facial trauma. So at the time, our detectives did suspect a friend of his named Ronald Kates. He would frequently borrow money and tools from Mr. Stagner, but we didn't have enough probable cause at that time to make an arrest. So we created the cold case team in 2020, and detectives started looking at this case again. So today, actually 30 years to the day, Ronald Kates is in jail in North Carolina, and we have charged him with this homicide, and he's being charged with first-degree homicide. So these cases are extremely important to us. We want our community to know that just because the case is a year old or 5 years old or 30 years old doesn't mean we stop investigating the case. And so we know that, and we remember that every homicide victim leaves behind family and loved ones and friends, and that has an absence in their life because of these tragic crimes. So I'm so very proud of our cold case team. Since we started the cold case team in 2020, they have solved 13 cases dating way back to 1984.
So I'd like to give you a little bit of the facts and timelines of this 1992 case. The detectives did an amazing job, original detectives of this case, laying the groundwork and interviewing family members. John Stagner was a very hardworking man that worked for Orange County.
The Orange County Sheriff's Office thanked the Kates family for coming forward with the information that led to Ronald Kates' arrest. While it is uncommon, they are grateful that they did that. Without their testimony, the case may have never been closed.
As far as what we've seen, that the Kates family went above and beyond to be able to assist us, give us a great deal of background for even the Stagner family as well as their father or their husband. So.
Thank you to PDS Debt for sponsoring this video. Having debt can be so stressful and can really feel overwhelming. With inflation on the rise and the cost of living expenses at an all-time high, now's the time to start looking at what you can do to address your debt. I know I've been there more than once in my life, and things can snowball so quickly, and I know I'm not alone in wishing there was a better solution. Interest fees can make you feel like it's one step forward, two steps back. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, this program is for you. PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or even medical bills. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment. Everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit accepted. Save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. PDS Debt is giving those who qualify a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/TC. You will receive a full breakdown of how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/TC. Thank you again to PDS Debt for sponsoring this video. Number 2, Nancy Bennallack. On October 26, 1970 in Sacramento, California, 28-year-old Nancy Bennallack was late for work. It had been extremely unusual for her. She worked for the Sacramento County as a court reporter, and she never missed a court date. A coworker called her house and there wasn't an answer, so she called her son to ask him to swing by her apartment and check on her. He did, buzzing several times with no response. He then convinced the apartment manager to get access into the apartment, and after knocking several times without a response, they did. Inside, they discovered a brutal scene. There was blood everywhere. Nancy was found deceased in the home. Her autopsy determined she had been stabbed over 30 times. There was a massive investigation into Nancy's murder. Her fiancé at the time was Chief Public Defender Ferris Salami, and initially, they weren't sure if it had been retaliation from a disgruntled client. The killer had appeared to have taken care not to leave evidence behind. They found a piece of tape that appeared to have been used by the killer to wrap his fingertips in an attempt to not leave any prints. However, the killer may have underestimated Nancy, as there appeared to have been a massive struggle. Nancy had several defensive wounds, and it appeared that at one point she had managed to get the knife from her attacker and fight back because there was a significant amount of blood left behind from her killer. Salami had been with Nancy the night before. The two had gone for dinner, and he had dropped her off, stayed at her apartment for a bit before leaving around 11:30 at night to go back to his own apartment. He said it had been normal for Nancy to leave her balcony door open a bit so that her cat could go in and out of the apartment. She had never had any concerns about doing that since she lived on the second floor. Law enforcement believed that this is how the killer got in, by scaling the balcony below. The blood trail from the killer led from the balcony all the way to the apartment's parking lot. In the 70s, all law enforcement could do with blood was get the killer's blood type, which had been useful in eliminating suspects like Nancy's fiancé, but didn't lead to any suspects. They had interviewed over 500 potential suspects, but nothing brought the case to a close. Years later, the DNA profile was done and uploaded into state and national databases. For 5 decades, the case sat cold. Ferris Salami died in 2014 of leukemia at the age of 84, never knowing what happened to his fiancée. In 2019, the case was reopened by the Sacramento County Cold Case Team, and they decided genetic genealogy was going to be the best way to get an identification of Nancy's killer. Through that process, they identified several relatives related to the suspect, and in 2022, they finally had a confirmed identification after 52 years. Richard John Davis. He was a longtime Sacramento resident. He would have been 27 years old at the time of Nancy's murder, and he lived in the apartment building near Nancy Bennallack. His apartment faced hers, and he would have had an unobstructed view into her apartment, and it is believed that he may have been stalking her. Davis didn't have any violent criminal history, but did have several DUIs. Davis died in 1997 at the age of 54 from complications of alcoholism. Nancy's sister attended the press conference announcing Davis as the murderer. Retired Sacramento County Detective Mickey Lynx led the press conference.
You know, that's the whole thing of this, is not forgetting these cases. I mean, we have so many.
With Davis's death, there's no further path for justice. But for the victim's sister and family, they're finally receiving the answers they've been searching for all along.
We have missed sharing our children and grandchildren and so much more.
Number 3, Anna Kane. On October 23, 1988, the body of a young woman was found in a wooded area near Reading, Pennsylvania. Her death was immediately ruled a homicide. They determined she died by strangulation, and she still had bawling twine wrapped around her neck. Law enforcement concluded that the woman had been murdered in a secondary location before her body was dumped in the woods. They later were able to identify the woman as 26-year-old mother of 3, Anna Kane. The local newspaper ran a cover story about the murder, seeking information from anyone who had seen Anna the night she died, or if anyone knew who she was with that night. Anna was a sex worker, and law enforcement were having a difficult time getting people to talk to police. Detectives didn't have a lot of evidence to go on, but they did discover that her killer had left DNA on her clothing, as well as the twine used to strangle her. Then, in 1990, a letter came into the newspaper that ran that story of Anna's death. Addressed from a concerned citizen, the writer had included several details that had never been released to the media, information only the killer would have known. Detectives believed that the killer had penned the letter to taunt law enforcement. They kept the letter, and years later they were able to collect DNA from the envelope and match it to the DNA found on Anna's clothing. In 2002, the Pennsylvania State Police received a grant, which would give them funding to do genetic genealogy testing, and later that year they had a suspect, Scott Grimm. Once Grimm was identified, law enforcement looked to confirm the DNA connection. Grimm had died in 2018 at the age of 58. However, he'd been involved in a harassment case with an ex-business partner where he had mailed several menacing letters. They compared the DNA from those envelopes to the DNA in Anna's case, and it was a direct match. At this time, law enforcement are continuing to investigate how Grimm connected with Anna, and if there are more victims out there.
So, Anna Jean Kane, it's a picture of the victim there. An old crime scene photo from the day she was discovered. Up there, there's a red mark on where she was discovered. Down here is the Reading area. So, Anna Kane was discovered on October 23rd, 1988. The investigation revealed that she had been killed and placed at that location. She was from the Reading area, had recently moved to the Birdsboro area. Autopsy showed that it was ruled as a homicide, caused strangulation. So, as part of the investigation, the victim's clothing was collected, later analyzed for DNA. We were able to determine that an unknown male DNA profile was on multiple items of the clothing. In 1990, the Reading Eagle had ran a front page story about the homicide, kind of asking for information, stuff like that. And then in February of 1990, the Reading Eagle received an anonymous letter signed from a concerned citizen that had numerous intimate details about the homicide. This led investigators to believe that whoever wrote the letter had committed the homicide. So we later tested the envelope that the letter was sent in, where you would lick and seal the envelope. That was able to determine that the same DNA profile from the envelope had matched the victim's clothing, again leading us to believe that whoever had mailed this letter was the murderer. So recently we did genetic genealogy, which was completed by Parabon Nanolabs, based out of Virginia. They were able to determine that a possible suspect of Scott Grimm. We were able to determine that Scott Grimm had died in 2018 of natural causes. However, we were able to obtain a direct sample of Scott Grimm's DNA. We also found that in 2002, Scott Grimm had been arrested by Exeter Township Police Department in Berks County it was a harassment case where he had also mailed other letters to his former business partner. So we were able to take the direct sample from Scott Grimm as well as these envelope letters. We had our Pennsylvania State Police lab do a direct comparison to the DNA from the letter in 1990, as well as the original evidence from the victim's clothing, all of which showed that the same contributor, being Scott Grimm, was on, his DNA profile was on all of those items. Nate. This is a photo of Scott Grimm. We're still looking into him. It's still somewhat of an active investigation as far as some of the details of where he lived, where he worked, who his friends were, stuff like that. But he was native to the Hamburg area, and again, he died in 2018.
Anna's daughter, Tamika Reyes, was 9 when her mother was taken away from her. Despite the struggles her mother faced, she wants her to be remembered as much more than what the media has portrayed her to be. Anna Kane was a loving mother. She was outgoing, fearless, and caring. She cherishes the memories she has of her mother and remembers her as a woman who made great sacrifices for her children and was loved by all those who knew her.
I didn't think I'd see this day, but I had hope. My emotions are all over the place, happy, sad, angry.
Tamika Reyes was 9 when her mother was killed.
I was lucky enough to at least know her and get a little bit of time with her, but my brothers don't remember her. She was a person. She was my mother. She was Lovick and Michael's mother. We loved her. We still do, and you know, she never got the opportunity to make a change.
Well, that is it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this content and what I do over here, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. As always, if you give this video a like if you enjoyed the content, that would be much appreciated, as it is the easiest way to help the channel grow. We also have channel membership as well as Patreon if you want to get more behind the scenes content, as well as just supporting the channel. In the description box of this video, you will find links to all my socials to connect with me, as well as other goodies. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to PDS Debt for sponsoring this video. I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.